Hi, I'm Victoria Dougherty, and I'm a blogger and historical fiction writer who is endeavoring to write a great epic romance series. And this is Love at First Write, which is my vlog chronicling those endeavors. And this is a place where we talk about story and character and love scenes and what makes a memorable pair of lovers and what really makes for um, a romance that has the sort of elements in it that really transcend genre and that appeal to all readers, male and female, and how to create that magic, because that's actually the magic that we aspire to. And today I want to talk about charisma. Now, charisma comes from the Greek, as so many words do, and it means gift of grace. And that is just so apt because it seems to me that grace is often contradicting characteristics that weave together to make one magnificent tapestry of a human being. And each of these characteristics sort of ebb and flow, and they really do work magically and marvelously together instead of appearing odd and disjointed. As can be in lots of different types of people who maybe have contradictory characteristics, but somehow do not have charisma. The Bible refers to charisma as being divinely conferred, and I think that is just beautiful because there is a spiritual dimension to charisma, and it's something that is so easily recognized, but not so easily defined, much like faith itself. And as writers, we get to play God because we actually get to endeavor to create charisma, to conjure it, to layer on our characters and smooth those rough edges and try to make charisma bubble up from them. When I think of characters in literature and film or TV as well, who have these incredible characteristics, these contradictory characteristics that weave together. At first, I think of Sherlock Holmes, because here we have the intellectual gumshoe. Now, gumshoes, we usually think of, Raymond Chandler characters who are sort of streetwise and, students of human nature that come at it sort of from the grit and the ground up. Whereas Sherlock Holmes, what makes him so unusual is that he comes at it from the top down. He is brilliant. He is an intellectual, and yet somehow he ends up lending his talents to detecting instead of being, say, an inventor, an astrophysicist, the prime minister. All of these things we can see him doing, and yet here he is dealing with, lowly police detectives. Well, who are, I don't think police detectives are lowly, but I mean, when you compare them to someone like Sherlock Holmes, who, outdoes us all, for heaven's sake, then it becomes such an interesting component of the story to watch this fish out of water come into this sort of gritty underworld of, say, criminal London or wherever he is. And of course, he was also given an incredibly charismatic nemesis in Moriarty, because where you have Sherlock Holmes, you must have a Moriarty. Another incredibly charismatic character is Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones, whether you read the George R.R. Martin books or you watch the series or you do both. He is an incredibly fascinating character who just oozes charisma, because here you have someone who is really brilliant, yet he is a dwarf. He is born to this incredibly lofty, powerful family, and yet his father despises him because he's a dwarf. He is magnetic. He is all of these things, and somehow he manages to use, the fact that he was born into this small body, as a way of becoming a giant. And when you read Game of Thrones, when you watch the series, you want him to be your friend. You want him to be your ally. You want him to be your lover. You want him to be all of these things, because this is what a charismatic individual does. A charismatic individual can be deformed. A charismatic individual can be beautiful or ugly, or he or she can be any of these things and yet still maintain their magnetism and their sexuality, and make us want to be with them and follow them through not only a book, but often a series. One of the things that I think with charisma, I mean, I think certainly you can have a story that is interesting without having charismatic characters necessarily. I think of James Patterson novels, which are a really great example of this. He is such a master, and he is such a master of plot, and he is so airtight on plot and creating conflict and actually charisma within a plot that, not only will you read one of his books, you'll read every single one of his books, but I think that when you really hit this sort of magic point in a romance, I think that you can I think you can get away with that in a thriller, but I think in a romance, if you really want your readers to draw them into a romance series, and certainly you'll at least with my romance series, I am going to have thriller components with war and all of this very bloody stuff going on. But I think that in a romance, particularly, charismatic characters do a lot in bringing a reader along. I think that we have to fall in love with the characters as well, as they happen to fall in love with each other. I think if we don't, we are one step removed from that romance. I think we can't just be voyeurs in this. We must, as readers, to really become engaged, be participants in these two people's love affair, and to imagine ourselves within that love affair. And that is where charisma comes in, because charisma is an internal conflict. In a great story, we have conflict between characters. We have conflict between events. We have conflict between characters and events, and characters and characters, and all of these different mixes. But I think that when we know we have created magic, when there is also that internal conflict, the philosopher warrior, the person who is deformed but tremendously sensual and can seduce any woman. These are marvelous, marvelous things to give a reader to chew on, and they create a bond with a reader that brings them in, I think, as more than voyeurs, but as family members. And I think of when I think of series that really bring you in, like a family. Game of Thrones certainly does that. I think we can just use that, since we're talking about Tyrion Lannister. We can really use that as a great example, because there are so many charismatic characters in that story, characters who have so many internal contradictions and yet have these tremendous gifts that they share with the world. And in turn, that brings us in, and that makes us feel like we are actually a part of that world. Not just that we are reading about that world, but that we are a part of it. It alerts us to the contradictions within ourselves, and also the contradictions in the people we know. I think that it brings our humanity alive in that way. It triggers it within us, as well as within the story, and as well as within the characters that we're reading about. And when that sort of dance starts to happen, that tango of internal recognition and recognition of what we're reading, I think the story explodes like a big bang and just keeps on expanding. And that is what then makes a great, great series. Not just a standalone novel, but a series. There has to be that big bang element, and it begins in the first novel and it spreads like wildfire. So that's, I think um, that's probably about it. I mean, it's so now, now comes the hard part. Now comes sitting down and going over, at least with me, I'm doing my edits. So it is about creating those internal and external components within a character that then conspire together and are unleashed upon the world. And I certainly hope to do that with mine. Thank you, and join me next time.